This is our comparison video of the Sabre Apex Prime, specifically, compared to other high FPS options out there. Looking at the 300 FPS range out of the box, the Apex hits 260 to 270 FPS, but there's stronger springs. This is an 18 kg spring. It's still a really light prime because of those bearings, a very smooth prime for that 300 range, and using worker bamboos or whatnot, you can get over 300 no problem, and there's even stronger springs you could use for the Apex, but of course 300 is the most practical. So I have some other options on the wall here that also hit 300 reasonably easily that we'll compare to. So overall though, the Sabre Apex Prime is a pump action springer, so it has a lot in common with other pump action springers. Most notably the Caliburn I think is very similar, as well as the Worker Swift, the Talon Claw. Those are some kind of staple pump action springers. You have some other high hitters like the Lynx or the S-Lynx, the extended version of Lynx for that more air volume, can more easily hit 300. The Perilous is another one, a recent build that can hit 300, although it is a bit bulkier, but we'll talk about that later. But the Sabre Apex Prime has points for going for it because it is the first to do some of the things that you can see the Apex do. For example, the linear rails are not super common in a lot of blasters yet. I do know that there are some bearings in some of the ZWQ stuff. And there's also a single bearing in the bays on top to make that prime smoother. Of course, there are some also upgrade or mod kits, kind of aftermarket. I guess if it's homemade and 3D printed, it's all aftermarket at that point. But there are some options for some builds that are printed to use bearings and stuff like that. The Alchemist is not up here as well as some other ones from the California scene. Has a couple of independent designers that I cannot remember. There are some blasters by Super Stress and some other makers that also have bearings, also have smooth primes, can also hit 300. These are the ones I had lying around in the shop already that you can also get from us or from local retailers or whatnot. And also the Worker Harrier is a pump action springer as well. So as far as a pump action springer goes, I mean, the Sabre is another pump action springer. So a lot of people think that, oh, I got one pump action springer, I don't need another one. They're all pretty much the same. And they are all very similar in the fact that they are pump action springers, meaning the similar shape, size, platform, how you hold it, those kinds of things are going to be similar. So we're going to talk about some of the comparisons between them. Specifically, personally, before the Apex, my go-to springer was the C4, the Caliburn. I ran a Caliburn for many, many, many years, ever since I guess the original machine Caliburn and the first version of the 3D printed Caliburn. And I recently sold my personal Caliburn, but I've always built a new one because it's a pump action springer. It's tried and true as far as you pull it back, you pull it forward, you shoot. And then you have the bays as well, and the keyring, different bolt action 300 FPS options. And I guess the Harrier can do bolt action, but it's a bit harder at 300 FPS. Yeah, so we're talking about bolt action right now and priming method, where the Sabre Apex Prime has a bolt action option. So other bolt actions or high hitters include the keyring and the bays, and the Harrier, although the Harrier doesn't do well at high FPS with the bolt action just because the angle of the bolt action they include is kind of a weird shape for a priming handle, and the bolt action is really small and uncomfortable. So with some mods it could be doable, but even at 300 FPS I think that spring force with that air volume needed would be difficult to prime with it being so low versus in line with the priming bar itself. So Harrier, a little awkward bolt action, hard to get high FPS. The keyring is great with the bolt action. It's ambidextrous bolt action, which is a no-brainer for bolt action. It's shell ejecting though. Overall, the keyring to get 300 FPS is a little more difficult as well because you do have more air seals going on. So I think generally people have a harder time hitting 300. 280s, 270s, 290s, typical. Same thing with the Apex though. It kind of depends on what darts you're using. But if you want to get tuned in, assuming you're going to take the time to tune these, which you should, and maintain them, 300 is reasonable. Same thing with the bays. Again, 300 is not super easy to do just because of the O-rings and air seals. The ones they use are not super high quality as far as the O-rings go and the fit. The way it's machined though, the parts and the tolerances on the O-rings leave some room to be desired, but you can get the metal upgrade kit But you know, the bays with a stronger spring, with a longer barrel, bamboos, 300 no problem, or at least high 200s, 280s. But again, amongst all those blasters, I will say that the Apex seems to hit 300 a lot easier because of the default longer barrel and the large air volume, larger air volume than the keyring. I feel like the Apex is able to hit higher FPS easier. I haven't really tried different setups and chroning it though, but from our local games, it seems like it was being able to hit far and hit accurately, which is good. And maybe you don't know the exact FPS, but I think it's good. So anyway, bolt action. Some things to say though is these are all ambidextrous options, bolt handle on either side, which is nice. If you look at the overall size compared to the caliber, it's very similar. You do notice this one has a little bit of a longer stock, so it's actually about the same length with the extended pad. So otherwise the caliber has a little bit of a longer stock. So the Apex can feel weird without this 3-printed extension. There's kind of short, stubby stock. If you want something more like a full-size platform, you can see that I could gain another inch or so and still be, you know, and be comfortable with it, basically how it fits. But again, personal preference. I personally like the size and shape of the caliber because it is a kind of full-size rifle style versus some of the smaller options like the bullpup with the links. Here we have the X-Shot long shot. And of course some HPA options with their bullpup configurations. They have a much smaller platform, which is good because you get a high FPS in a small package. But personally, I feel like it's so small to me, your play style is different in my opinion. I think that if my blaster is a little longer, not too long where it encumbers me, but just long enough that I feel like I'm sturdy and I'm stable, then I'm not gonna be taking as wild shots. I'm gonna be using it in a different play style or different tactic or strategy, which fits my play style. But if you like the smaller platforms or bullpups, or maybe you want something that is small and you can kind of tuck in and you're going to use it for CQB, that's obviously consideration. So the Apex overall is a long platform, as well as some of these other ones. Keyring is long. Of course, you have the Storm is long. Those are the things that kind of fit me and my build. I like the Harrier's good. I think the short prime is not really a problem, so like the Valkyrie, even though it's like a Talon Claw with a full-size stock, I think I like as well because you get the full-size back with the short prime on the front, which means you can do higher, faster shots, higher rate of fire. But I've never really had much of a problem with the caliber anyway because I'm not usually going to be shooting a lot of darts or spamming darts that suppressive fire. Usually don't play that style. Of course, the Apex and the Caliburn, they both use the same magazines. The Caliburn has the option of being full length though. So as far as cross compatibility goes, I'd have to give the point to the Caliburn. The Caliburn has more rail options or more add-on options as far as, you know, more foregrip room on the bottom. It has overall more rail on top, maybe all the way out to the front. Yeah, it is a little longer rail, kind of arbitrary though, but you can also then put rails on the sides. You can put, you know, lower stock spacer. Customizability, it's 3D printed, so of course you can put your name on it, different colors. You can make your own parts if you want to. The customizability of the Apex really has to do with the rail on top and the different grips it can take on the front and back. And that's about it, because of course, different springs, they both can do that. Different barrels, they both can do that. The big thing different though about the Apex is it has M-lock on the front, so you could put rails on. However, I have found that the clearance between the M-lock and the bolt shuttle, these screws, you have an 1/8 an inch or less between there. So if you're trying to put a rail, an M-lock attachment on the side, your corresponding T-nut on the other side has to be a thin one. I've had to cut down some nuts or sand them shorter or cut some bolts to make them fit. So it is possible, but it's not necessarily easy out of the box. I guess one nice thing about the customizability as well, which is a point for the Apex, I guess, is pump action or bolt action. You don't have that option with most of these things here. Well, none of them actually, except for like the Harrier where you can put a bolt action on it, but it's really just a different pump handle, so you could do that on anything by putting a bolt action on the foregrip, but it still rides on the bottom, meaning you lose the ability to add extra rail on the bottom. So the Apex out of the box, you can put the rail on the bottom with a bolt action, then you could run different attachments like a bipod or anything on the bottom. You want to keep that bottom area open if you want to do that. You could kind of do that with the C4 with putting some rail here, but generally speaking, not really many blasters that are pump action have the option of adding thing on the bottom. So overall customizability, as far as I'm gonna build it myself, which is a pro. The Caliburn, you can build it yourself. Also the Caliburn 3D printed blaster, so you can print it yourself. The Apex is metal, so a pro and con there is you can build it yourself, but it's gonna be a little less durable in the long run, depending what you print it out of, and depending on who's printing it. All those factors can come into play, where you have a ton of options on what you can print it in, or what color and stuff like that, but you're limited to the scope of a 3D printer. The Apex is all metal, which means you could use this as a hammer and it would probably be okay. So overall durability, this will last you longer. So if you are looking for something that you don't have to tinker with, of course something that's not 3D printed is gonna have overall less tinkering or less parts replaced down the road. And so things like the Worker Harrier, anything that's injection molded or has CNC parts to it is going to be stronger than something that's mostly 3D printed. The Sabre does have this barrel collet, but I think it's a weird feature, and they do also have all these grub screws you can loosen and tie in, which people have said, which is true, but so do all the other ones. And so the idea of, oh, quick swap collet, no tools, just twist the barrel. But you have to have like the whole entire barrel block, which adds cost and weight, and then you can't as easily use that barrel in a different blaster. So might as well just go with using just the grub screws or just a different clamping collet. So I wouldn't really say the Apex has an advantage by having that quick swap, but that is a feature that the other ones don't have, is having a collet, but I don't think that gives it a point in its favor. The ability to use different grips could be a point in its favor if you have the grips, although if you are looking at getting another blaster like that already has a grip built in, you don't really need extra grips, and the fact that this Apex does not come with one would be a point against the Apex, I believe, because then you have to go buy a grip, install the grip, keep track of the grip, versus having it built in already. It is able to hold an air seal despite being in a windy, dusty field multiple times, traveling the world. Apex still held the same air seal as when I first put it together, versus a lot of these, you get dirt built up in their tubes or whatever, into their slots or whatever, and it gets dirty really fast and you have to do regular maintenance. Not sure why, but my Apex, maybe I was treating my Apex better. I'm not sure, but overall it seemed like the Apex had better machine tolerances on the parts that mattered, and so maybe you can't change it or modify it as much, and maybe there are a few things like there's a lot of parts, and therefore there's a lot of things that could happen, I guess, like screws could come loose and you have to tighten those and stuff like that. But I mean, compared to anything 3D printed, you probably have overall less maintenance because you don't have parts breaking, just things loosening, stuff like that. So point to the Apex for maintainability and maintenance and ease of use. I mean, compared to most of these other ones, I can say that they're probably going to take more work to maintain, with the exception of like the ones that I haven't used very much because I don't know much about them. But having used the Apex compared to some of the other ones I have used, it does seem like it takes less maintenance, which is nice. Overall ergonomics, I'll have to say the Apex is slim, so I think if we're talking about overall shape and size, I'd probably give it to the Apex again, because the Apex is narrow. It's the same width all the way down minus the grip, versus the Caliburn, which by default has a wider pump grip with the priming bars going all the way down. So it is thin, nothing sticking out, but overall it is a bit wider. You have like the magwell, which is like chunky, which is like square, kind of sharp corners, those kinds of things. You don't have that as much that I've noticed with the Apex. The Apex does have like sharp corners, but overall it's rounded on the sides, but it's sharp on the ends because of like the parallelogram shape they've got going on. The Apex isn't the thinnest, but it's pretty dang thin. I'd definitely say point to the Apex over most builds. I think the Lynx also is pretty thin. Over most builds though, I mean the builds I have here, yeah, the Apex is probably one of the thinner ones for sure. So DIY kit for the Apex is like $400, $475, something like that. So pretty expensive. It is all metal, but if you're looking at, hey, I'm gonna shoot anything 300 FPS, point to everything else, it's cheaper than the Apex. But if you want something all metal, then point to the Apex, because even like the all metal ZWQ Valkyrie here, that was $400 or $500, something like that after shipping. And then you have like the M79. Of course, the Sweetheart Storm has some prints, but like most of the blasters that have a metal center core or all metal are all going to be more expensive than the Apex. So point to the Apex for price of metal blaster. The weight of the Apex, though it is all metal and it has some chunky metal spacers, the gold blocks in here that add weight to it, plus with the short stock and the long front, which is normal for a pump action rifle size Springer, because of that weight, with also the weight of the priming shuttle here being steel as well, with more thick aluminum in front, the gold there, it is front heavy. Like, it feels like carrying it around, you're putting so much force. You can see my forearm flexing here to hold that thing up. That is definitely a point to anything else. The Apex is very heavy. Sling, definitely required. The Apex, I personally wouldn't consider the Apex viable for low FPS play because it is so heavy. Even with a short barrel, it's gonna be so heavy that at low FPS, you might as well run something else. And so the Apex, in my opinion, is really only viable for high FPS. And because of that, I would say that the customizability of other platforms makes it so that if you're into building something and using something like one blaster for all situations, then I would have to say that your best bet would be something like a Caliber or Talon Claw, something that you can build from scratch and tune up and down with all the parts and stuff you want. And compatibility, it doesn't use a threaded barrel, which is nice. I'm not sure what size chamber, haven't measured that, but as far as I'm aware, I believe it should be pretty compatible with different barrels. Although a point against the Apex's compatibility is the springs. I found that the springs the Apex needs for that priming, compressed length, and all the other, diameter and stuff like that, it's a little bit pickier, I think, on what springs it can take than maybe a Caliber. Probably mostly because of the spring rest and how much room you have for a compressed spring. So the Apex has a nice short distance between the catch and the back, so the spring has to have very few coils per inch, but has to be a strong spring. So because of that, I haven't found that a lot of springs are actually cross-compatible with the Apex at their max compression. So compatibility as springs go, point to everything else. If you want to build something from scratch, from 3D printing and hardware, then you can go with a Caliber, which I should say overall performance, the Caliber can hit 90 FPS all the way up to 300 plus, depending on what you do with it. And you can swap that out, play with it all you want. The Apex can do high power. This is already over 300 FPS. With a super light prime, I could fire those shots off all day, no problem, versus 300 FPS or more all day in another platform is gonna put more strain on your arm, make you more tired. So if you want something that's like high-end, high FPS, the Apex is definitely a more practical high FPS build than a lot of these builds here, which take more work. So if you're looking for something high FPS Springer, like pump action, Apex for sure. Worth every penny because of the metal components you get and the ease of use and user friendliness of the Apex. For high FPS, no problem. If you want something lower FPS or more jack of all trades, then looking at some of the other options that can hit 300 but can also hit lower if you want to. Granted, most of those are going to be more for tinkerers or for modifiers. I know maybe the Harrier would be able to get up and down without as much tinkering, as well as some of the other blasters, again, injection molded, stuff like that, that because they're plastic and they're still easy to quick swap parts, you have that customizability to go up and down. But the Apex, I think, would have an easier time hitting higher FPS all day, no problem, with those bearings, with the large air volume. Rate of fire of the Apex, it's a pump action Springer. You'll fire as fast as you want to prime it. Now, it does have a spring you have to compress, so you are going to be limited by your upper body strength and your own stamina and how long you can use it. But because of those bearings, it makes it for an easy prime. So you could run this all day high FPS a lot easier than a lot of these other options here that are pump action Springers. The exception being a 300 FPS HPA, like the Neutrino, the Axiom, what have you, which are no priming, just semi-auto gas powered, or the Sweetheart Storm, which is electric primed and powered. So that's 300 FPS all day, no work involved. They do have cons there where Apex Springer, you don't have to have batteries, you don't have to have air, you don't have to have any of that to get that pump action Springer. So pro to, again, point to the Apex for its ease of use and usability, but con compared to HPA and AEB, which have the auto cycling versus the manual Prime. Let us know what you think and what is not only better, or ooh, I don't like that, or ooh, I don't like that blaster or this blaster, but why. Tell us why you like or don't like certain things about certain blasters. It'd be interesting to see what people prefer, because I know some people prefer, bullpup, small, fast, quick in the US. All day, every day, you have bullpups. But then somewhere like overseas, say Foam Fest, high FPS, paintball fields, airsoft fields, Malaysia, Singapore, maybe less Singapore, that long-range designated marksman, sniper, whatever, DMR role, the Apex is the one for that. And so if you're playing in a high FPS kind of open area, then out of the options I have shown you here, I think the Apex would be probably one of the best, if not the best.